The chandeliers glowed like captive moons above a sea of glittering guests, their crystals catching every laugh, every lifted flute, every whisper meant to wound. Musicians tucked into a nest of orchids played a soft waltz that sounded expensive, the kind of music that never had to earn applause. White-gloved waiters slipped through the crowd with champagne that smelled faintly of peach, while photographers drifted like minnows, angling lenses toward the most photogenic pockets of power. The ballroom itself had been designed to tell a story: gold-veined marble, hand-painted ceilings of mythic couples blessing earthly vows, and floral arrangements so tall they seemed to breathe. It was less a home than a statement. Wealth could roar without raising its voice. Behind a velvet curtain, far from the flattering light, a woman stood still for a moment and counted her breaths. She pressed a palm to her lower back, then to the gentle swell of her stomach. The doctor had said to rest more. Rest was a word that didn't belong to her. A clipboard clung to her hand like a second spine. On it, lists multiplied, arrows branched, nothing ever fully checked off. Her uniform was clean but unremarkable, gray like storm water, and she wore it with the invisible posture of someone who had learned to carry other people's evenings. She had always moved carefully around beautiful things: vases that cost more than apartments, silk chairs that bruised if you looked at them harshly, people whose pride shattered faster than crystal. She stepped back into motion with the merciless will of the event. Ice buckets needed replenishing. 2 guests wanted their table changed because someone's ex had appeared with someone younger. Kitchen timing had slipped by 4 minutes because a bronzed rack of lamb had rebelled against the thermometer. She solved the problem silently. She had learned the choreography of erasing herself. A man's cufflink snapped, and she fixed it with a twist of a safety pin so elegant he never noticed. A nervous teenager in a tux had lost his place card. She walked him to a table with a view and made it look planned. When one of the string players brushed his bow with a greasy fingertip and cursed under his breath, she held out a napkin just in time, and he looked at her as if she'd conjured it. From the mezzanine, the hostess of the night descended. Silk parted for her when she walked, attention followed like a tide. Diamonds threw electric sparks at her throat. Her smile at strangers was never the same one she wore when she leaned close to staff. When she reached the foot of the stairs, she glanced around the room to confirm that it adored her, then beckoned with 2 lacquered fingers. The maid came at once, that clipboard tucked tight as a secret. "You're late," said the hostess, though there was no clock nearby. "You slouch when you carry trays. And your hair, does no one teach standards anymore? I can pin it back higher," the maid said, lifting a hand halfway before lowering it again. "Would you like me to move the lilies by the head table? The scent is a little strong near the candles." "That's not your decision to make." The words were light, the blade behind them not. "And do not call attention to yourself. The guests are sensitive." Her gaze traveled, pausing at the curve beneath the gray fabric. It sharpened. "You'll manage?" "I will." "You'll do more than manage. You'll do as you're told." The orchestra slid into a glossier melody, something that asked to be photographed. A master of ceremonies took the stage and praised generosity, elegance, devotion. The crowd applauded itself. Speeches bloomed and faded. A woman in emerald recounted a story about love at first sight that sounded rehearsed. Men clapped each other's shoulders as if sealing deals. Romance wore the shape of spectacle. The maid slipped between chairs and skirts and polished shoes. Sweat gathered beneath her collar, a hidden river. The baby rolled, a sleepy turn, then settled. She whispered a promise into the air that smelled of roses and money. "Almost done, little one, just a few more hours." Her feet had grown wider by half a size. She'd bought new shoes from a discount bin and stuffed the toes with folded paper. They pinched less than yesterday. She'd learned to measure pain against usefulness. In a quiet alcove near the kitchen, she stole a sip of water and murmured a melody under her breath. Not to entertain anyone, not to entertain herself even, only to steady her heartbeat. Singing was something from a different time, a different room, where the window was small but the light was kind, where the mirror had a crack and the cracked line made her smile look like lightning. Her mother had taught her hymns and sorrow songs and joyous ones that pretended sorrow never existed. Only when she sang could she feel her thoughts align like stars. A shadow fell across her. "Well," said the hostess, smiling as if about to deliver a compliment. "Aren't you full of surprises?" The maid straightened. "I'm sorry. I was just wasting time," the hostess finished for her. "But perhaps not entirely. I've discovered something adorable. You sing." The words were not kind, though the tone was. The maid said nothing. "Don't be modest," the hostess went on, as though modesty were a vulgarity. "I heard you crooning in the stairwell last week. It was quaint. And do you know what this evening needs?" She looked out over her guests, the way a conductor surveys a symphony. "It needs a touch of authenticity." A chill snuck beneath the maid's uniform. "There's a schedule for the program," she said carefully. "The pianist has a. Leave the schedule to me." The hostess's smile widened by a single, predatory millimeter. "You'll sing one song? Something heartfelt. I'll make the announcement after the next toast." "I'm not part of the." She stopped. She was part of nothing. She was the path other people walked on. "You're part of my event," the hostess said softly, leaning in close enough for perfume to enter the lungs and sit there like an order. "Consider it a request. Or don't, if that helps you say yes faster." The maid's fingers tightened around her clipboard. Her mind sketched the last hour, plates to deliver, silver to polish, a spill to mop before it became a rumor. The baby kicked, a small tap, as if testing the walls of the world. "I don't think I should, ma'am." "You will." The hostess's eyes flicked down again, lingering. "I'm being charitable, giving you a moment of attention you will never have again. Don't make me regret it." The maid swallowed. Her throat felt like it had been lined with dust. She nodded once, the motion stripped of agreement and left with inevitability. In the ballroom, the toast ended. Laughter crested, then tapered. The hostess stepped onto the small stage near the grand piano, accepting a microphone as if she'd invented microphones. "Friends," she sang, and the room answered with instant silence. "Tonight is about love, ours, and the love we inspire in all of you. In that spirit, I've prepared a small surprise. Our very own songbird will serenade us. She's been hiding her talent in plain sight." Chairs turned. Heads angled. The maid stood in a waterfall of light she hadn't asked for. The pianist looked puzzled, then obedient. He touched the keys as if asking a question. A single note hung like a held breath. Every conversation halted. A group of men near the bar smirked, elbows finding ribs. A woman raised her phone without even pretending not to. A boy in an ill-fitting jacket peered with the curiosity of someone about to see a magic trick he doesn't believe in. The groom, no, not a groom, a husband renewing promises under ceilings painted to look like heaven, lifted his head from a cluster of admirers and stared. His expression shifted, confusion giving way to something else, but from where she stood, the maid couldn't translate it. She went numb in patches, like snow melting into cold water. A tremor passed through her legs. She thought of a tiny room where a chair waited for her at the end of the night, beside a chipped mug and a folded blanket and a pair of little booties she'd knitted with clumsy thumbs. She thought of a life not meant to be spectacle. She thought of singing, but in a voice owned by herself, not rented for someone else's pageantry. The pianist's hands floated expectant. The hostess's smile cut across the room, thin as fishing line. "Go on," she said, in a tone bright enough for the crowd and dark enough for the target. "Make us proud." A pulse of pain threaded her lower back and dimmed the edges of the world. Not a warning, not yet, but enough to make the present feel fragile. She tightened her grip on the microphone until her knuckles went pale. Her mouth opened. The air tasted like champagne and lilies and a faint metallic note of fear. Sound didn't come. Silence swelled, cool and dangerous. It shifted into a chorus of whispers. Is she nervous? Was this planned? Is this a joke? Someone near the front laughed once, sharp as a fingernail against a wineglass. The hostess tilted her head, the diamond at her throat throwing sparks that landed like insults. Louder, she said, sweetness stretched thin enough to tear. We can't hear you. The maid drew a breath as deep as the room would allow. The baby moved again, a slow roll, an echo of life reminding her what mattered. Sweat pricked along her hairline. She felt the first edges of dizziness, the way a room tilts when a ship turns. A memory rose unbidden, a church basement in summer, a voice teacher with gentle hands saying, "Don't sing to them. Sing to the truth inside you." Another breath. The pianist waited, faithful to the moment even if the moment betrayed him. The hostess's eyes narrowed. Somewhere in the second row, the husband stood. The maid parted her lips once more, searching for a note brave enough to survive the spotlight, or a refusal strong enough to live with afterward, and the room leaned forward as one, teetering on the edge of what would happen next. The first note that left her throat was thin as thread, but it held. It hung for a breath, trembled, then gathered weight, like a leaf catching a breeze and realizing it can ride it. A second note followed, warmer, shaped by memory rather than fear. She aimed her voice not at the rows of faces but somewhere over and beyond them, to a place where voices were not currency. The pianist, relieved to have a direction, set a slow lattice beneath her, the kind of chords that don't intrude, only cradle. For 3 measures, the room remembered how to listen. Then the interruptions began, the small cruelties that feed on performance. A snort near the back. A whisper disguised as admiration. "Oh, how quaint!" A giggle barely smothered in a napkin. The hostess stood with a smile that said the evening was unfolding exactly as designed. A woman near the aisle lifted her phone higher to record. A man swirled his drink and said to the friend beside him, too loudly, "Even charity needs standards." The singer didn't falter, not at first. She shaped the melody with careful hands, as if folding a blanket around a newborn. Her breath work wasn't perfect. Months of carrying a life had changed the mechanics of her lungs. But she used what she had with the efficiency of someone who has never been given extra. The lyrics, simple, honest, told of a river that learns the shape of its banks before finding an opening to the sea. The piano echoed that image with a delicate run, the player no longer puzzled, now intent on being kind. Closer to the stage, a teenage boy lowered his eyes, ashamed of the laughter he'd almost joined. At a nearby table, an old woman, stiff with pearls and memory, blinked hard and whispered, "My God, she can sing!" The husband at the head table leaned forward, elbows leaving imprints in white linen, attention uncluttered by any of the people talking at him. For a moment, his face was all listening. The hostess drifted to the edge of the crowd like a queen inspecting a ceremony. "Louder!" she prompted, voice wrapped in sugar for the audience, iron for the target. "They want to feel it." Her hand made a small upward flick, as if controlling a puppet's strings. The singer complied, pushing her tone through the room's resistance. The song swelled, and with it a muscle near her spine clenched hard. A pinch, then a pull, then something sharper threading through her lower back. She grounded her feet, adjusted her posture, breathed through it. The baby rolled, not frantic, curious, perhaps, at the thunder above. She touched the mic stand to steady her hand, and the gesture read to the recording phones as poise. 2 men by the bar had turned their commentary into a sport. "I've heard better at open mics," one said, smirking. "But open mics usually bring their own appetizers," the other replied, to the kind of laughter that hopes to camouflage a smallness of spirit. A young woman beside them looked up from her glass with a frown, then quietly edged away, as if not wanting to be filmed in the same frame as them. The second verse carried new color. The singer rounded a high note she might have ducked on another night, and met it clean. On that pitch, for a heartbeat, the ballroom altered, money and marble and petty judgments receded, and what remained was a tone that pierced through without breaking anything. Someone clapped once, involuntary, then stopped, embarrassed by being first. Another phone lowered, no longer certain that mockery would survive playback. The hostess registered the shift and narrowed her eyes. She moved closer to the stage and arranged her mouth in a smile that had never reached her eyes in its entire career. Her diamonds caught the light as if they were applauding themselves. "There we are," she said, not into the mic, but loud enough to be overheard. A little polish and even humble things can shine. At the line, I named the small hours after Mercy. The singer felt a cramp bite down hard enough to tilt the room. She softened her knees, swallowed a sound. The pianist's gaze flicked up. She gave him the tiniest nod that meant keep going. Sweat threaded behind her ear, and a strand of hair slipped free despite the pins. Somewhere past the stage, a server froze with a tray of champagne, recognizing in the set of her jaw a kindred refusal to spill anything. The husband stood a fraction taller, the tilt of his head changing from curiosity to concern. Don't be dramatic, the hostess breathed, the words aimed with precision, a private arrow in a public quiver. No one likes a scene. The singer's hands wanted to cradle her belly. She kept one on the mic and let the other rest lightly, a compromise that read to the crowd as a gesture of feeling. The next note came out ridden with air. She corrected the placement and found the center of it again, but the pain did not recede. It began to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Her vision almost shimmered at the edges. She fixed her gaze on the strip of floor where light met shadow and walked her voice along it like a tightrope. A laugh knifed the air. The same man at the bar, red in the face, too pleased with himself, called out, "Encore in the pantry after?" His companion choked on gin, delighted by his own wit. The phones caught that too. A woman near them spun and said clearly, "Shut your mouth." And the reprimand clattered like a dropped fork. The balance of the room started to slide. The last chorus rose. The singer lifted her chin and poured through it everything she had kept private. The night she'd found the positive test alone and laughed and cried into the same towel. The day she'd mopped the floor under someone's apology and said, "It's all right," when it wasn't. The rent paid exactly on time with the matrix of shifts she'd had to solve like a prison break. Hands slicing vegetables, hands folding sheets, hands rinsing another person's lipstick from a glass. She poured and the note widened, richer than the body that carried it. Eyes shone. Shoulders sank. A man who had been plotting the next business thing forgot the nouns he needed. And then, as if her body had waited for that exact summit to assert its own agenda, a lance of pain went through her belly with a clarity that had no poetry. The sound left her throat and did not come back. Her knees softened again, but this time too much. The microphone's rubber ring met the stage with a thud. The piano stumbled, stopped. A gasp rolled across the room like a breeze turning into weather. She caught the mic before it toppled completely, but not herself. One knee met the polished floor. The shock of marble against bone shot up her side and stole her breath. Phones tilted to capture the angle of collapse, at least one lowered in shame. The hostess moved a step forward and then stopped, calculation beating empathy in a familiar photo finish. "Up," she murmured through rigid teeth, a smile still pasted on for the audience. "It's not finished." "It is," came a voice, quiet the way thunder is quiet just before it asserts itself. Some guests turned. Others pretended not to have heard, the way people pretend not to see a storm cloud until it's directly overhead. The husband was already moving, a line of determination carved down his face that had not been present at any of his prior ribbon cuttings or magazine spreads. He circled his table without touching a chair, barely brushing past the edge of the floral tower that had cost more than a salary, eyes fixed on the stage. The hostess reached him first by half a stride, sliding in front of him like a door that closes itself. "She insists on making a moment of it," she said brightly, voice tuned to be overheard by the nearest recording device. "Isn't she charming? Such spirit. We'll get her a glass of water and—" He looked at her smile, and then at the woman kneeling on his stage. The dissonance did not compute. "She's in pain," he said, not loud, but unambiguously. Something in the crowd that had been poised to titter recalibrated. Laughter withered without oxygen. "She's pregnant, not porcelain," the hostess replied, the sparkle in her tones slipping to reveal impatience. She turned, angling her face for the camera lens nearest to her. "Do finish, dear? Everyone's waiting." "Yes," the husband said, stepping around her. "They are." He reached the singer and knelt, indifferent to tuxedo fabric and polished shoes and the ludicrous notion of optics. Up close, He saw how white her knuckles were, how faint the sheen of sweat across her forehead, how she kept one hand on the mic out of habit even as her body pleaded for different priorities. He offered his palm, not as a command but as permission. "Breathe," he said quietly, "pitched for her alone?" "You don't have to." "What exactly?" the hostess interrupted, stepping beside them so she could still be included in every shot. "Do you think you're doing?" He did not answer her. He looked at the pianist. "Stop," he said. "One word even." The pianist lifted his hands from the keys as if they'd burned him. Silence claimed the room in a new way. And in that hush, before anyone could decide what the correct reaction was, a voice from the bar broke higher, uglier. "Since when do we applaud the help for swooning?" It was the same man, drunk on something more sour than his drink. His friend elbowed him, too late. The husband stood. The distance between him and the heckler was 60 feet and 3 classes. He shortened it to 20 with 4 strides before a murmur from the crowd slowed him, a warning that he had trespassed into something that would not be forgiven at the next brunch. He stopped. He exhaled. He turned back to the stage. The hostess slipped in again, a pivot honed by years of managing rooms. "Friends," she sang out, lifting her arms in a gesture of broad reassurance. "A brief intermission while we assist our little songbird. Refresh your drinks. We'll resume shortly with the Rio program." "Enough," the husband said, not shouting, yet the chandelier crystals seemed to vibrate with the force of it. The single word moved through the guests like a command to stand down, like the opposite of laughter. Every phone caught the way he said it. Every face felt, without quite knowing why, that the evening had broken along the seam. The hostess's smile froze, still performing for a camera that had become a witness rather than a mirror. The singer pressed her palm to the floor, bracing to rise against a pain that did not care about etiquette. He stepped back onto the stage, eyes very clear, jaw set, and looked not at the room but at the woman kneeling there, as if the entire ballroom were a background that had mistaken itself for the subject. What he did next? Someone would say later, breathless into a phone. "You won't believe." The silence that followed was not the kind of hush that accompanies awe, nor the empty pause between two speeches. It was heavy, deliberate, alive. 100 bodies, clothed in silk and jewels, held their breath, sensing that something irreversible had shifted. The man on the stage, husband, millionaire, host, stood tall, shoulders squared, his gaze burning hotter than the chandeliers above. He did not have to raise his voice again. The authority in his stance was enough. He looked at the woman kneeling before him. Her breathing was shallow, the strain across her face impossible to hide. She still clutched the microphone, though no sound escaped her lips now. Her other hand protected her swollen belly as though it contained the only treasure that mattered. He crouched down, ignoring the collective gasp from guests who had never seen him kneel for anything. "You don't need to prove anything to them," he said softly, the words meant for her alone. His hand extended, palm open, waiting. She hesitated, shame and instinct battling inside her, until another cramp forced her to steady herself against him. The contact was small, but it rooted her like an anchor dropped into a storm. The hostess was quick to recover. She plastered on a bright smile, diamonds flashing, voice pitched to the crowd. "How charming! How touching! James is always so sentimental. A little stumble, and suddenly he thinks we're in a melodrama. She's fine. Aren't you fine, Mariah?" Her words sliced through the room with false sweetness, each one designed to minimize the scene, to turn pain into entertainment. Mariah tried to speak but faltered. Her throat worked, but no words came. The hostess moved closer, crouched as if to help, but her eyes betrayed her impatience. "Up, dear," she whispered sharply, "before you embarrass me further." James rose in an instant, stepping between them, his body shielding Mariah from the woman he had called wife for 10 years. His voice dropped, but its intensity cut through the hall. "She is not here to entertain you, Victoria." The name was not spoken with affection, but with the finality of a sentence. A ripple ran through the guests. Some exchanged looks, shocked, intrigued, hungry for scandal. The drunk at the bar snorted but fell silent under the weight of stares. The pianist, hands still hovering above ivory, lowered them fully, bowing his head as though acknowledging the truth in James's words. Victoria laughed lightly, her mask of composure cracking at the edges. Darling, really? You're overreacting. It was a bit of fun. Look how they all watched. She should be grateful. A maid could only dream of such an audience. The crowd shifted uneasily. Grateful. The word dropped like ash on silk. Several women frowned. One man shook his head in disgust but said nothing, unwilling to risk his wife's fury later. Yet the judgment was palpable, rising like smoke. James's voice sharpened. Grateful? He turned, facing the guests now. Tell me, should a woman on her knees, carrying life inside her, be grateful for humiliation? Should she be grateful that cruelty paraded her as a spectacle? His tone grew louder, resonant, and the words ricocheted against marble. Is this what love looks like in our house tonight? The ballroom reacted like a single body shifting in its seat. Some avoided his eyes, others nodded subtly, as if admitting complicity by silence. A woman dabbed her tears with a napkin, muttering, "She sings beautifully." Another man whispered, "He's right," though he quickly hushed himself when Victoria's glare darted his way. Victoria's smile collapsed into a snarl. "You would shame me, in front of all of them, for her? I would shame you for this cruelty," James replied, steady. "And I would honor her for surviving it." He turned back to Mariah, his hands still extended. "But only if she chooses." Mariah's lips trembled. The weight of 100 gazes pressed down, but something else rose inside her, something older than fear, stronger than exhaustion. She had sung lullabies to herself in empty rooms, filled silence with hymns no one cared to hear. She had once believed her voice was a thing too fragile for public light. But in this moment, surrounded by judgment and cruelty, that fragility hardened into resolve. She nodded once. James helped her to her feet, steadying her until she found her balance. The pianist caught her eye, silent question lingering. She gave him the faintest smile. His fingers returned to the keys. A soft prelude, no louder than a heartbeat, rippled through the hall. Mariah inhaled deeply, pressing through the pain in her body, and then she sang. This time, it was not the timid lullaby forced from her throat by fear. It was a river breaking its dam. Her voice rose clear and resonant, soaring up to the painted ceiling, sweeping across every table, weaving into the gowns and tuxedos, demanding not amusement but reverence. Each note vibrated with years of swallowed words, with nights of labor and mornings of exhaustion, with the strength of carrying a child while carrying other people's burdens. The lyrics were no longer a soft plea but a declaration. The river does not ask permission to carve the stone, it insists on its path. Her song poured truth into a room that had thrived on lies of superiority. Guests leaned forward, their eyes shining, some reaching instinctively for their partner's hands. Even those who had mocked her earlier sat frozen, their shame now illuminated by her brilliance. Victoria's face twisted, the applause of the melody mocking her silence. She had meant for humiliation, but what stood before her was transformation. She hissed under her breath, "Enough of this." But no one heard her. The hall belonged to Mariah now. At the final note, she let her voice linger, then fall gently like a curtain drawing the night to a close. The silence that followed was deafening, but not heavy this time. It was reverence. Then the clapping began, tentative at first, then swelling into thunder. People rose from their seats, standing ovation cascading through the hall. Tears streaked down more than a few cheeks. Even the pianist, who had played countless rehearsed galas, wiped his eyes discreetly. Mariah lowered the microphone, chest rising and falling, tears streaking her face. But she was not broken. She was radiant. James looked at her with something unmistakable: pride, awe, perhaps even love of a kind no diamond could purchase. He turned slowly back to Victoria, his voice low but cutting through the cheers. "You wanted her to be small. Instead, she eclipsed you." Victoria's hands trembled, her perfect manicure catching the light like claws. She laughed, brittle, desperate. This is absurd. She's a maid. She belongs in the kitchen, not on my stage. But her words sounded hollow, drowned out by the applause still roaring. No one echoed her. No one even looked at her. The room had shifted allegiance. James straightened, his next words measured, deliberate, meant to be remembered. She is more than what you tried to make of her. Tonight she reminded every one of us what dignity sounds like. He extended his hand toward Mariah again, inviting her to step off the stage beside him. She took it. Together they faced the crowd, not as employer and maid, but as two people bound by a moment larger than wealth, larger than cruelty. The applause raged on, the sound of truth crashing against the walls of privilege, until even the chandeliers seemed to tremble. And beneath that thunder, Victoria's silence was louder still. The night was no longer hers. The room buzzed with anticipation of what would follow, but in every mind the same question whispered: what final justice would come of this? The applause seemed endless, rolling over itself like waves breaking against marble cliffs. Guests who moments earlier had whispered cruel jokes were now standing, their hands stinging, their eyes wet. The pianist, usually a professional wallflower, allowed himself a small smile as he bowed his head, reverent to the courage he had just accompanied. In the middle of it all, Mariah stood trembling but tall, the microphone lowered to her side, her chest heaving as though each breath was part of the song that still lingered in the air. James did not move at first. He let the ovation wash across the hall, let the crowd realize that what they had witnessed was not an accident but a truth revealed. His gaze never left Victoria. Her painted smile had crumbled into a mask of disbelief. She stood frozen, unable to reconcile that the maid she had paraded for humiliation had transformed into the centerpiece of the evening. Finally, James raised his hand. The applause softened, then quieted, though the energy still buzzed like static in the air. He spoke, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through silk and pride alike. Tonight was meant to celebrate love. What you just saw, he gestured toward Mariah, was love in its truest form. Not the kind we boast about with diamonds or gold, but the kind that refuses to break even when crushed beneath cruelty. Every face turned toward him, waiting. He let the silence build, let the weight of his words press down on the gilded room. Then his voice hardened. And you, his eyes drilled into Victoria, turned that love into a weapon. You forced a woman, carrying life inside her, to kneel and sing for your amusement. You tried to strip her of dignity to inflate your own. That is not love. That is cruelty, and it has no place here. Gasps echoed like dominoes falling. The crowd was not used to hearing such words spoken aloud in halls built on appearances. A few nodded vigorously, others looked away in shame. Phones tilted again, recording every syllable. Victoria's throat worked, searching for a response, but all that emerged was a brittle laugh. You exaggerate, James. I meant it as light-hearted. A charming moment for our guests. Look, they were entertained. Her eyes darted desperately around the room, seeking allies, but none returned her gaze. Even her closest confidants shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to be caught siding with her in the glare of this truth. James stepped closer, his presence towering though his tone remained steady. No. They were moved by her courage, not entertained by your malice. And I will not allow this house to carry your shame any longer. The words hit harder than a shout. The guests held their breath. Mariah stared, uncertain if she had heard correctly. Victoria's face drained of color. You cannot be serious, she hissed. You would embarrass me like this? For her? James turned, his voice swelling, directed now to every corner of the room. For justice. For decency. For the truth. Yes, I will. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some clapped again, tentative but approving. Others whispered into their phones, already crafting the scandal that would flood social circles by morning. James looked back at Mariah, his eyes softening. From this moment forward, you are no longer a maid in this house. You will never again bow to cruelty here. You have my protection, my respect, and my gratitude. His hand extended once more, an invitation not of obligation but of honor. Mariah's eyes filled. Her body trembled, not from fear this time but from release. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The gesture, so simple, struck like thunder. To everyone watching, it was unmistakable. She had been lifted, not as charity, but as an equal, acknowledged before those who had laughed at her hours earlier. The crowd erupted again, not with gossip but with applause that carried conviction. People stood taller, some crying openly. The sound reverberated until even the chandeliers seemed to join in, light scattering like applause of its own. Victoria's composure shattered. "This is madness!" she shrieked, her voice breaking against the roar of clapping. "She is nothing. A servant. A nobody. You'll regret this, James. You'll ruin yourself for her." But her words were drowned in the ovation. Her power, once absolute in these circles, evaporated in the heat of collective judgment. She stood abandoned, a figure of ridicule, her jewels no shield against the scornful eyes now turned on her. James faced her one final time, his voice carrying the cold weight of judgment. "No, Victoria. The only ruin tonight belongs to you. You disgraced yourself, and no amount of wealth can buy back what you've lost. Tonight the truth was revealed, and it will be remembered." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She looked around desperately, searching for a sympathetic face, but every guest turned away. Her empire of arrogance crumbled in silence. James guided Mariah gently off the stage, steadying her as if she were the most precious thing in the hall. Guests parted, creating a path lined not by pity but by respect. Some reached out, touching her arm lightly as she passed, offering words like "beautiful" and "brave." Phones no longer sought scandal but captured the dignity of a woman who had transformed shame into triumph. At the far end of the room, James paused and turned back to the guests. His final words sealed the night. "Remember this evening not for wealth, not for spectacle, but for the voice of a woman who showed us all what strength truly is." The applause thundered once more, so loud it seemed the walls themselves might collapse. Mariah, tears still streaming, let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She had walked into the ballroom as a servant, forced to sing for humiliation. She left it as a woman who had sung her truth so powerfully that the world could never unhear it. Behind them, Victoria remained alone beneath the glittering chandeliers, her jewels catching the light like a mockery of the love she had tried to counterfeit. Every whisper that followed her would remind her of this night, the night she tried to break another, and ended up broken herself. And in the heart of that grand estate, where cruelty had sought to triumph, it was a maid's song, fragile, fierce, unforgettable, that rewrote the story forever. The final memory of the night was not the chandeliers, not the gowns, not the diamonds. It was Mariah's voice, lingering in the minds of everyone present, proof that dignity cannot be silenced. And long after the last guest left, the words echoed still. The truest jewel of the evening was not wealth or power, but the strength of a woman who refused to be broken.